This morning on The Real Story, we're breaking down the presidential debate. The current president on the stage with the former. What Connecticut's representation on Capitol Hill has to say and the potential ramifications, fallout, and switch-ups we could see now. We're bringing your questions to a political expert. But first, here at home, lawmakers back in their chambers with a more than 130-page emergency bill passed through special session. What was in it? What does it mean for you? And what are the conversations among colleagues with lots of priorities stacking up and a budget year coming quick? Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. We were back at the state capitol this past week for a special session. Some big things passed, and here now to break it all down this morning, Democratic Representative Elani Kavros Degraw, who introduced the legislation in the House this past week. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Emma.
So I was there Thursday, you were there Thursday,
Yes.
A little bit of deja vu being back,
Yes.
you know, just 2 months after the regular session closed. But this emergency certification bill, you know, the governor's office and leaders said there were some things to fix. That's why this special session was called. So let's start with the big one. I think a lot of people are talking about the main pressing reason a lot of people, you know, pointed to as the reason for the special session, the car tax. It's, you know, not going away, even though we did see some lawmakers over the past couple years try to make that happen. What is the depreciation change here, and what was the problem you all were trying to fix this past week?
Yes, thanks so much. You know, the biggest issue was that 2 years ago we had put something into the implementer to reduce the car tax. And so we're moving from NADA to MSRP, that's number one, but we had a major issue with commercial vehicles in that they needed to move from the personal property deck to the motor vehicle deck, because otherwise we were going to see tax increases for our commercial vehicles in the triple digits, and well, I shouldn't say triple digits, but definitely, you know, 33% or higher for some municipalities. And we certainly don't want to hurt small businesses. I want to make sure that our plumbers, our landscapers, and even companies as big as UPS are able to get what they need and not have such a huge tax increase. But it's also for our residents as well. This is a more predictable schedule because you'll be able to purchase a car, look at what the MSRP is, and see that the depreciation schedule across 20 years is what it is. You can use your town's mill rate and figure it out.
Yep. And among residents and even parties, there was some confusion and there was some rhetoric back and forth, you know, people calling it a tax decrease, some people calling it a tax increase, but, you know, really isn't that cut and dry. Bottom line, it's a slight increase and then getting lower each year. So sort of pay, you know, more now and then less later. What was the conversation like calling for that increase to get towns their revenue now? Because, you know, no constituent likes to hear the word increase when it comes to taxes. So what were sort of the conversations like when this was being drafted?
So that's part of the confusion that I even had on the floor when we were talking about this, because this is a depreciation schedule. So the way people are looking at it is, oh, it went up. No, it didn't go up. When we passed this on the House floor during regular session, we passed 85%. Last year, we actually had tried to pass it at 90%.
Right.
So in fact, it did go down a little bit in terms of that. And when you're looking at the 85% times the 70%, you know, it is going to be a decrease overall. In fact, some people will see a decrease sooner than others, but we need to make the funding more predictable for towns and taxpayers. So, you know, we saw used cars hold their value more significantly during the pandemic. I had constituents reach out and say, this is the first time ever that my used car has gone up in terms of taxes. So this is what we're trying to do to make it better, not just for the towns, but also for the taxpayer.
Gotcha. So you do get to do a lot of the details sitting on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. We know that hasn't been an easy job lately, especially this past session, the past couple years with federal pandemic era funding running out and a lot of different asks and needs from across the state. Looking ahead to being able to make more tax policy change next session, you know, restarting conversations of maybe, you know, even getting rid of the car tax. I know Senator Bob Duff mentioned that on Wednesday Wednesday, kind of at the end of his spiel, making a plea that this needs to be something big that's tackled. What's on your mind priority-wise for 2025? Are there any early conversations with colleagues of things you really want to get done?
Well, certainly we hear a lot about the fiscal guardrails, and I think we're going to have to really figure out, they have worked very well. We've seen billions and, the amount that we've paid down. I think it's so important that we have paid down that debt because regardless of party, for decades, we saw how the debt just got more significant. That's improving our bonding rating, and that's great. However, we also have nonprofits that are really struggling, and our numbers in terms of services have really gone up. We've seen a rise in the homeless population, and when I'm talking to the people who are doing that work, they will tell me we are nearly homeless ourselves, and that's a real struggle. So I think we're going to have to find a balance between these fiscal guardrails, which are critically important, and making sure that our nonprofits are getting the funding that they need, because again, these were things that government used to do that we've now pushed off to nonprofits, so we have to make sure that we are taking care of all of our residents as best we can.
Right, that's been the story of really the past two sessions, and a lot of conversations were had before this past session, and it seems like, in a short year, and especially not a budget year, it's hard to get that all done. But yes, balancing the fiscal guardrail is definitely a big part of that. So getting back into the special session and talking about the process of the General Assembly, the introduction of the emergency certified bill was definitely a lot more welcome in the House Thursday than it was upstairs in the Senate Wednesday. We saw a lot more tension there. There's been some frustration over these omnibus bills, what a lot of the Republicans have called these aircraft carrier packages. They felt like a lot of things were kind of slipped in. The Senate trying to, introduce an amendment to separate all of these Wednesday, which failed. There are reasons to rope all of these things together to make it more timely, to make it easier. Obviously, not a lot of time in a special session. But, what are your thoughts about that? A lot of people, have varying feelings about these omnibus bills. They kind of seem to be getting more common, but we saw a lot of things die in the regular session because they were all roped in together. So what are your feelings on that?
Well, we saw things die in the short session because we ran out of time too, and that's really frustrating to us. As the Planning and Development co-chair, I think we passed out 41 bills this session. We managed to get 19 out of the House, which was really significant for a short session, and then to watch things die up in the Senate is very hard. I mean, we talk about it a lot in the House about, our relationship to the Senate. I will say, in terms of this bill, there really is no other way to do it because you are in special session. This isn't emergency certification. You are supposed to be doing, critical work. They do not have to be, there doesn't have to be an emergency to go into special session, which I think is a misconception. And even some of my colleagues, I think, were unaware of that. But the majority of what was in this bill did receive public hearing. So I understand why the Senate would have wanted to separate that. I get it. Frankly, there were some things I would have liked to have separated out. But at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of what was in the bill did receive public hearing during the short session. And, if I had my way, we'd have a full-time legislature, not a part-time legislature. So, because I think there's a lot more good work we could be doing outside of being part-time legislators.
And I want to bring up that public hearing piece again, but, first you mentioned doing that critical work. With the previous session, as we said, we saw a lot of these big priority bills die, AI, climate, because they just couldn't get passed through all roped together. Some people would have preferred it to be piecemeal. And there were also some issues that people were upset, for example, climate, that wasn't brought up during this special session this past week. Governor Lamont and legislative leaders wanted this to have a narrow focus, so they said they didn't want to throw a whole bunch of things in the pot here. But, how do you answer to constituents who feel like, as you just said, there were more things that should have gotten done sooner?
I'll be honest with you, it has to do a lot with how we're running the calendar and running out of time. And when you look at how tight our public hearing process is, our committee process, and then the number of session days that we actually have, we share the same frustrations as our constituents in many ways. All you have to do is look at the past week for the storms that we've just had. I know in District 17, Avon and Canton suffered with power outages this week that were pretty significant. The number of trees coming down, and certainly, the climate is not getting any easier, and the heat is certainly bringing on these incredibly powerful storms. So I'm just as frustrated that we haven't gotten to some of the pressing issues that we should have.
And so public hearings, that was a sticking point for a lot of Republicans with one part of this bill, which is Aquarion.
Yes.
You know, they kind of felt like this was just thrown in, that it wasn't as much of an urgency and didn't really need to be a part of this bill. And they felt like this proposal hadn't had a public hearing, hadn't gone before the voters before being put in this bill. You know, how did this part come about? How did this get added into the package?
So I get that this is challenging. The Planning and Development Committee has such a sometimes strange cognizance, but charter changes are what fall under our cognizance. We actually changed South Central's Regional Water Authority charter this session, so we did have a huge public hearing on that. We actually didn't have a lot of testimony other than from the Water Authority itself, so I'm not sure how that would have worked, but that's why this wasn't in Energy and Technology, because this was merely a charter change to allow the South Central Water Authority to be able to bid on Aquarion. Now, some see this as a good thing because we certainly would like to keep it small and owned here and not owned by, say, a Chinese company coming in and trying to buy up water, as we're seeing land grabs across the world right now. But I think that it is going to need more public hearings, and because PURA would have to approve any sale, and there's no guarantee that this water authority will actually be the one to purchase Aquarion, you will see public hearings moving forward with PURA. I'm not sure if they'll be more regional, but certainly everyone that is affected by this in that area will have a chance to weigh in.
Gotcha. And so obviously now we're heading into summer. You all won't be back in the chambers, I'm sure, for many lawmakers, hopefully until January. Not that you don't all love the work you do, but as was mentioned this past week, you also have other full-time jobs to get back to. But is there anything you really hope constituents took away from what was passed this past week, or anything you think really should be a priority for next session? Because obviously we're always looking ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's really good that we finally got this car tax implemented appropriately, both for the towns and the taxpayers. That was a significant win. I think that, you know, we didn't talk about it, but the State Historical Preservation Office, that was part of this bill as well. I think that's really important because now it won't just be SHPO that's deciding things. DECD will also be involved. I think it's great to have more eyes on these projects so that the best possible decisions that will move our state forward are a part of that. I'm looking forward next year to working more on affordable housing and especially, you know, transit-oriented development, figuring out where we need to go. We have at least around 100,000 units short in Connecticut. We're not the only state, certainly, that's having this problem, but we have to be focused on how we are going to move this state forward, and part of that is transportation, and another part of that is affordable housing. Housing of all types, frankly. So, because I hear it from my seniors, I hear it from my college grads, I hear it from my families who have children with disabilities. We have a housing issue, and we are going to have to address it.
Yeah, it's impacting everyone, and definitely a lot of conversations to have before January of 2025. Representative Kavros Degraw, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. I really appreciate the time.
We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you. There's still more to get to here, though, on The Real Story. A historic and anticipated presidential debate. We're breaking it down ahead. The fallout, statements from Connecticut's delegates on Capitol Hill, and political insight into the candidates and their campaigns with just a little more than 4 months until ballots are cast. Stay with us.